Hey guys, my name is Sky LeBron, and today I'm going to be going over chapter 11 of our textbook, which has to do with communication climate. So the most important thing when covering this chapter is understanding what communication climate actually is. And this happens between employees and employers. This also happens in relationships between a boyfriend and a girlfriend, or even among your family. Looking at communication climate, overall it has to do with the tone, the social tone of the interaction between two parties. The movie that I decided to use as an example for this was a 2009 film, Up in the Air, by Jason Reitman. It stars George Clooney, who plays a guy that overall his job is to fire people. So you can understand how that has to do with a lot of relationships among employees and everything else. But throughout the way, he also has to work with some people that he can't fire, rather has to work alongside with. And that creates different communication climates throughout. There are two different types of communication climates. One is confirming communication and the other is disconfirming communication. Confirming communication pretty much says that you are valued or you are important, as opposed to disconfirming communication, which says you are not valued or you are not important. This creates a negative communication climate as opposed to a positive one. The example that I have for confirming communication is a lot of the time these people that are getting fired and George Clooney has to fire them. His name is Ryan in the movie. When Ryan has to fire these guys, a lot of these people will say, what am I supposed to do now? What happens next? And something that he'll say is, you are valued. This is just one step in your career. And a lot of the people that are successful now were in your same exact position. He's showcasing that you are important and you are still valued, even though he's really not going to value them after this day. And let's look at some forms of confirming messages, confirming communication. One is recognition. When you are walking down the hall, you see a friend and you say hi to them and they kind of ignore you or they don't acknowledge you. That's easy to perceive that you're ignoring them intentionally, when really a recognition is the best or the first form of a confirming communication. Just showcasing that you acknowledge somebody, you know that somebody is in your line of sight and you are willing to say hi back. And that leads into the next one, acknowledgement, which has to do with listening to a person's story, nodding your head, and just showcasing that you are there and you are interested in what the person has to say. This is a form of confirming communication as well. The best one is endorsement, which shows that you are supporting someone's opinions or thoughts. And I have an example here from the movie Up in the Air. At one point, Ryan gets a new employee or a new coworker named Natalie, and she tries to introduce a new method of firing people purely online. It's through the computer. It's like a FaceTime type thing. And Ryan absolutely hates it. So he tries to go to battle for why he needs to travel, why he needs to be firing people in person. The big boss right here says, I like Natalie's method. I like what she's doing. It's cutting costs. And he endorses her message. He is willing to affirm her message. And with that, that shows a form of endorsement. He's agreeing with her opinions and her thoughts. And with that, she's able to strongly go ahead with her plan. But there are also several forms of disconfirming communication as well. And just looking at the bunch of them here, we'll start with impervious response. I put talk to the hand there. It's kind of ignoring the other person. We see this a lot with parents and children. Children will constantly be tugging at their parents' pants or something and say, mom, 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 and the parent will ignore them. That's a form of impervious response. The same thing happens when a parent is trying to communicate something to a kid and the kid really doesn't seem like they're listening. It's a form of ignoring somebody. The next one is an interrupting response. It's when you finish somebody's sentence for them, or if you are in a clothing store, you say, hey, I want to look for, and the person's already cutting you off and saying, I know exactly what you want to look for. It showcases that you really don't think the end of that person's sentence was important and you already know better than them. That's a form of disconfirming communication as well. The third one is an irrelevant response. Did you know that no number from 1 to 999 is spelled with the letter A in it? Yeah, me neither. It doesn't really matter to this conversation right now. We're talking about disconfirming communication, disconfirming messages, and yet I'm talking about something that's completely irrelevant to the situation. And this is a form of disconfirming communication as well, when you just say something that doesn't apply to what the person was just talking about. The fourth one is a tangential response. There's two forms of this, a tangential shift and a tangential drift. The The textbook uses an example of a kid coming into his mother's room and saying, "Hey mom, look at this rock." The mom immediately says, "Go wash your hands." This is a tangential shift because she is not even acknowledging what the kid is saying. She's rather just saying, it applies because his hands are probably dirty from the rock, but it's just a different subject, and it's showing that what you just said wasn't important. This is that was a tangential shift. A tangential drift is saying, "Hey, nice rock, but go wash your hands." So you're quickly listening and acknowledging what the person is saying, but you're drifting it somewhere else. So that's the difference between a tangential shift and a tangential drift. The next one is an impersonal response, which gives a generic answer. So if you say, "Hey man, like me and my girl, we haven't been doing well, and I just don't know what to do," and the response is, "Hey, everybody goes through problems, everybody goes through breakups, you just got to deal with it." That's a very generic response, and you're putting somebody under an umbrella rather than looking at their individual response, which isn't very good, and it doesn't make the person feel good. That's another form of disconfirming communication. An ambiguous response, and I have an example from Up in the Air in this one right here. At one point, Natalie says to Ryan, "What are we doing? What is our job?" And Ryan's response is, "We're here to make limbo tolerable, to ferry wounded souls across the river of dread." That doesn't really, I doubt that was in the job description when she applied, and it doesn't really help her understand what her job entails. It's kind of just this proverb. I don't think that's what she was really asking for. So that's an ambiguous response. It's not doing anything to move the conversation forward or promote a positive communication climate. The final one is an incongruous response, where different messages are being communicated than what's said, a lot of the times non-verbally. So if a person says, "I love you," but they're laughing while it's happening, how genuine is that? If you say, "Oh, I'm so excited to be here," but then you're yawning a couple seconds later, that also doesn't showcase a positive communication climate, and how's the person supposed to trust you there? And there's also disagreeing messages, which is something we're going to look at right now. Now, there's a difference between disagreeing disagreeing messages and the previous one that we looked at, because disagreeing messages says that you are wrong, not that you aren't valued or you're not important. It's just saying that you're wrong. There's positive ways of disagreeing messages, but it's important the way that you communicate those disagreeing messages. The first one is argumentativeness, and with that, it's important that you attack issues. When you argue with somebody, you want to attack the issue at hand. You don't want to attack the person. So a lot of times we'll see this in politics nowadays. An example from the movie is people would attack Ryan when he just finished firing them. He'd say, like, "How can you sleep at night? How can you go home to your kids? You have these resources, now I don't. How does that make you feel?" That's not attacking the issue of, "Hey, I just got fired." That's saying, "Hey, you're the problem, you're the issue." And it's important not to do that. You need to attack the issue saying, "Hey, what are my next steps? I don't know what I'm going to be doing," rather than attacking the person that, started it. The next one would be complaining, and that can also be taken positively. You can complain in a positive way if you're complaining about behavioral complaints rather than a person's personal characteristics. If you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend and you're saying, "Hey, you're a slob, you're disgusting, I hate living with you because you just live in a pigsty," that's a form of attacking someone's personal characteristics, as opposed to behavioral complaints, which would say, "Hey, I don't like the way that you've been leaving clothes around," or "I don't like how you haven't been washing the dishes." Those are all forms of complaining in a positive way. The final thing we're going to look at is aggressiveness, which it's very hard to make that positive. It's very negative, as it's demeaning the worth of others, and that's something you never want to do. They say it creates a lot of issues because it breaks down organizational commitment. You don't want to work hard for somebody when they're demeaning you, and you don't want to be in a relationship where they're demeaning you. So these are just some forms of disagreeing messages. I want to thank you guys for listening to me. Once again, this was covering communication climate, and we went over some of the key terms across the chapter. I hope you guys enjoyed it.